Welcome to the Unlist. Today, we are going to have a conversation about independent perfume. Now, some people, including myself, have called independent perfume artisanal perfume, but the term artisanal is one I'm trying to move away from because a lot of areas are now abusing the term, and honestly, artisanal has sort of become a code for upcharge, for gentrification, for let's take a $12 burger and make it a $25 burger because it's artisanal. And we have like certified organic, grain-fed livestock and like brioche buns and all this nonsense. So therefore, I feel like independent perfume is the most accurate, concise, and appropriate term for perfumers who operate independently from the perfume industry at large. Whereas artisanal is just dressing it up with lace and a pretty bow, right? And if you're the kind of hobbyist or enthusiast that is seeking independent perfume in the first place, then decorum is probably the last thing on your mind. You're not looking for expensive coffret sets or any other kind of resplendent packaging, brass caps, Swarovski crystals, thick bottles, etc. That is beyond your concern once you've reached the level of interest that has you pursuing independent perfume. Now, what is independent perfume beyond the fact that it is, well, independent of the perfume industry at large? That's a fair question. Some people may conflate it with niche perfume, and there are a few key differences between niche perfume and independent perfume. The biggest being that niche perfume, being however niche in interest it may be, in overall volume of sales, market share, what have you, is still backed by big corporate interests, still backed by big financiers, has a lot of money pumped into it to get it on shelves, to get advertisements out there. So even though it might be niche in comparison to, say, Chanel or Dior, right? A brand like Editions de Parfums Frederic Malle or Roja Parfums is niche compared to a Kenneth Cole or a Tommy Hilfiger. So the definition isn't incorrect, but we're still talking corporate backing. We're still talking lots of money, lots of advertising power. You know, the ability to get itself out there in ways that independent perfumers cannot, which is why they are, once again, independent. Raja Dove, which is operated by Roger Dove, is not independent. He has financial backing. Same thing with Editions de Parfums Frederic Malle, has financial backing. LVMH, actually, the largest luxury conglomerate in the world, backs Frederic Malle, and he has ties to Dior, much in the same way that Roger Dove has ties to Guerlain. So these brands may be niche under the strictest definition of the term, but they're not independent. And that's the big difference between independent perfume and niche perfume. And of course, the other big defining thing about independent perfume is it's typically a wild, wild west scenario of anything goes. When you exist outside the ecosystem, outside the infrastructure of the perfume industry, you are not beholden to its rules either. I mean, there's a plus side and a minus side to this. The plus side, which I'll get out of the way, is you're not beholden to their rules. You're not beholden to the regulations. You can do whatever you want. You are independent. The minus side to that is a lot of these large industrial companies, either bottle suppliers, oil houses that supply either ingredients and or perfumers, other supply chain positions within the perfume industry, they are all basically in collusion with each other. It's all cronyism. It's all I scratch your back, you scratch my back. We keep things under lock and key. You sign contracts. We put you on short lists, that whole thing. So if you are outside of all that, you are also shut out of all that, which means the captive materials that Firmenich and Givaudan have, which require contracts to access you don't get the purchase if you are an independent perfumer. Likewise, if you're an independent brand that has outside perfumers coming in working for you, like zoologists, for example, you have to sign a big money contract if you want certain perfumers who are employed by certain oil houses. So you will find that in most cases, independent perfume brands are owned and operated by the perfumer themselves. Very few cases will you see an independent perfume house that is hiring out their perfumers, because they just can't. There's not enough money going around for that. Zoologist is probably one of the few examples of independent perfumery that does actually employ other perfumers. And a lot of the perfumers that zoologist employs are actually also independent perfumers that do their own work, you know, but they're also doing zoologist a solid by making a perfume for them. So that is the nature of the beast with the independent perfume, is you are sort of outside the circle. So you are left to your own devices. You can do whatever you want, but you are also at a loss when it comes to distribution, access to raw materials, and the whole shebang. So the difficulty curve is much steeper when you are operating on your own, right? And of course, that reflects in the perfumes themselves. Generally, despite the independent perfume scene being the Wild West in terms of styles, compositional styles, themes, what you can expect the perfumes to be about, they can be about virtually anything, right? There are no strings on me, all right? There are no constraints. There are no marketing gurus. There are no mood boards. There is no AI algorithm regurgitating what kind of notes should be in a fragrance to determine its market viability. All that stuff is right out the window. It's, I feel like making a fragrance about this, so I am making a fragrance about this, and that is it. Said and done. So if you want to make a perfume about broccoli, cheddar, and bacon and dog vomit, then guess what? You can make a perfume about broccoli, cheddar, bacon, and dog vomit. Nobody can stop you if you're independent. Just don't expect to get your materials from Varanis or Javaldin if that's the case. They won't give them to you. They have that broccoli, cheddar, bacon, dog vomit captive under patent, and you need to have a few $1 million to throw around if you want access to it. And also don't get Alberto Morillas to perfume it for you, because he won't. He's not going to do it. That broccoli, cheddar, dog vomit fragrance is, you're left to your own devices to figure that one out. Now, also, the independent perfume scene tends to have much higher prices. Not necessarily higher prices than niche perfumes, because a lot of, as you know, niche perfume is marked up for status, for signaling of status, for luxury, right? So, good example of that is Creed. Creed sells for about 300-ish euros in Europe, you know, about 300 euros. But you come over here to the United States and it's $200 higher, because euros to dollars is pretty close. Like 250 euros is about $270, right? It's not far away. So 200, 300 euros for Creed over there. Over in the US, it's $500. That markup is entirely arbitrary. It is completely arbitrary markup. It's just because people will pay it. So we're charging it. Independent perfumery is not entirely like that, because even though the perfumers do want to make money, all right, preferably they'd like to be able to quit their day jobs, right, and become full-time perfumers and just make that their business. And some of the most successful ones have, you know, like Rogue Perfumery by Manuel Cross, like Tower Perfumes by Andy Tower. Those are independent perfumers who have made it, so to speak. Their perfumery is their livelihood, is their business. You know, Phoenix Artisanal Accoutrement, they actually have the word artisanal in their name. I hate it, but it is what it is. He also makes his living off of Douglas Smythe, I think, makes his living off of his product. So once you've reached that point where you can just say, okay, I don't need to show up at the office anymore, I don't have to turn up at the shop, you know, I can just do perfume. That's the end goal. However, they aren't necessarily trying to rip you off blind. They aren't trying to buy a vacation island, you know, or something like that. They don't have delusions of grandeur. They just want to make enough money to have a reasonable living, to maintain a quality of life, and still create perfume. Their passion, their artistic interest, their hobby becoming their job, right? Who doesn't want their hobby to be their job? I would love to just have my hobby be my job, but I know I'm never going to make rent doing perfume reviews. And I refuse to be an influencer, so here I am, right? Anyway, so you will notice that even though the prices are higher, I'm not going to say you get what you pay for, because that is never true in perfume. Never, ever, ever true. You never, ever get what you pay for, because perfume, by its very nature, is a luxury to begin with, and it's marked up accordingly. However, you will find that quality per cost, in terms of what you get versus what you pay, the parity is much closer with artisanal perfume, because they tend not to put the biggest margins they possibly can, but they are still charging you more, and that's the point. You are still paying a lot more for an independent perfume than you would for something coming from a big corporate-backed house, whether it's a niche brand or a designer, because the perfumer just cannot buy the materials in large enough quantities to get discounts. And because it's all labor, it's all knowledge, it's all craft, they are taking the time to learn how to perfume in the first place. They didn't go to school in most cases. They might have backgrounds in chemistry or something like that, but usually they're self-taught. So they have to figure this out on their own. They apply that accumulated knowledge, that experimentation, that trial and error, to make a fragrance that has never been made before in most cases, will probably never get made again in most cases too. And they are channeling that skill and that time spent and that knowledge into making a perfume. And then they have to buy the materials out of pocket. And because they can't go to Firmenich, they can't go to Givaudan, they have to go to these like smaller supply companies that sell materials at retail. And, you know, buying stuff like ambroxan crystals at retail, you know, is way more expensive than buying it like by the kilo. You know, if you get the contracts to get these materials by the kilo from like IFF, much cheaper than just getting a little package of it, right? That you can turn into 500 bottles of perfume or 1,000 bottles of perfume. So the materials cost them more on top of them having to spend their time. And since most of these independent brands are just one perfumer, maybe a significant other, a friend, a roommate, all right? If they are successful enough, like Aaron Terrence Hughes, they can hire a small staff that helps them compound the oil into fragrances and bottle it, you know, but it's all still done by hand. These are all handmade products. These are not things that go on a conveyor belt. They get filled by a machine, crimped down a sprayer by a machine, shoved in a box, cellophane wrapped, and out the door. That is not the case. This is someone sitting in a garage, sitting in a basement. Maybe they rent out a small industrial park, like a small office space somewhere, and that's where they do their perfume business. But it's somewhere very small, typically inside the home even, you know. I think the perfumer Trill Noel of Harmony, spelled with an X, by the way, so it looks like Zarmony. I think he actually was using his shed for a while. Literally the shed in his backyard is where he was doing this, because he had nowhere else to do it. So that's what I'm telling you. This stuff is very intimate, very small scale, literally handmade, and in some cases, the same pair of hands that creates the perfume is the same pair of hands that compounds the perfume, bottles the perfume. The same pair of hands is taking it to the post office and giving it to the postmaster. So the same pair of hands has, start to finish, created and shipped your perfume to you. That is how small it is. Now, what can you expect, fragrance-wise, scent-wise? Okay, another fair question. Since it's kind of anything goes and there are no restrictions, but material availability can also be a bit sketchy because they have to go through smaller suppliers and they have to get stuff at retail. Typically, it's a very MacGyver situation with independent perfumes. And a lot of these independent perfumers actually create their own materials where they can't buy them, which also means you may notice a larger percentage of naturals being used, depending on the brand. Not every brand wants to mess with naturals. Some are strictly synthetic in most cases, but a lot of them, if they're not mixed media, they're all natural. It's a bit of a Wild West scenario, but some of these brands will make their own materials, whether they're making distillates or they're making some kind of essential oil on their own. They have machines they can use, like evaporation machines that they can use to create essences with, or they do it the really, really old-fashioned way. People like Russian Adam literally make their own sandalwood oil, make their own oud oil using like ancient practices. They use the old distillation technique to create the stuff, the same way it would have been done, you know, hundreds of years ago, or in the backwoods of Borneo somewhere, and that's how he's making stuff. So it really just depends. It's a real wild toss-up. But since they are making their own materials in many cases, you're going to get scent profiles that you just cannot get from any corporate brand, niche or otherwise, okay? Good example of that would be Darren Allen. Darren Allen has a fragrance called the Devil Share. And Devil Share is a fragrance that has actual tobacco essence in it, has actual essence from the staves found at the bottom of like a bourbon barrel, okay, that has been extracted and made into a fragrance essence. You know, these are materials from real life objects that, again, you're not going to get from a corporate perfume brand because they're not going to invest the R&D, they're not going to buy the equipment or source the materials to create that stuff. They're just not, okay? It's not profitable for them. But he did it, and if you want to smell it, it's in Devil Share. Likewise, you have perfumers like Mark Sage from Clandestine Laboratories, who kind of approaches the perfume like a photograph because he's a photographer. So he makes fragrances that are like snapshots, either snapshots of places or snapshots of periods, sometimes both, a place in time. You know, he has a fragrance called Wendover. That's like a 1970s British village, the smell of creosote in the air and hawthorn growing on a vine somewhere. You know, he has a fragrance called Film Noir that's trying to be like that 1930s, 1940s suspense thriller kind of, you know, if you've seen Film Noir, you know what I'm talking about, like Howard Hughes pictures, stuff like that, you know. And then you've got some perfumers, again, like Orige Lador, which is run by Russian Adam. They go for the most sort of back to basics attempt at making perfumery. So they're trying to really make something that feels like it was created in an alchemist's lab 500 years ago. And even if there are some synthetics being used in those fragrances, they are by and large out of natural materials. Which brings me to my next thing, availability. Since you don't really know what's in the fragrance, it could be all natural, it could be natural synthetic, it could be a mishmash, you know. You could have themes ranging as wildly as vintage recreations like Rogue to really avant-garde stuff like Bruno Fazzolari, you know. And then you can also have things like House of Matriarch, where House of Matriarch, a lot of the fragrances from that brand are based around magic, you know, whether it's black magic, white magic, Wiccanism, witchcraft, whatever. It's based around magical themes, you know, and that's pretty cool, you know. That's different. You don't get that anywhere else. But the other thing is availability. These fragrances, due to the small-time nature, the expense, the rarity of the materials in many cases, or the materials being literally created, as I said, by the perfumer. Some of these are one and done. Like they only have enough of something to make one batch of fragrances. And this creates a notorious FOMO effect, you know, a fear of missing out effect. A lot of the really ardent, enthusiastic fans of these houses, the zealots, if you will, of these houses, the people who will buy everything this house puts out. A lot of them can get really into the rarity and exclusivity aspect, which in my opinion lessens the brand, because the brands usually aren't about exclusivity. They're not about rarity. It's not about luxury. It's about creativity, right? They're trying to channel their creativity into a fragrance and make a literal wearable piece of art. But one of the conditions is that limited availability. And you have situations with brands like Slumber House, very famous for this actually. Slumber House will make a release, never bottle it again. That's it, one and done. People fight over it, ends up being $2,000 on eBay. It gets nuts, right? And then you have brands like, once again, I'm going to cite Orige Lador. Sorry, I this brand just touches so many points in this conversation, but Russian Adam tries to compromise. He knows he can't make the same fragrance twice, so he puts sequels, right? He knows he can't do Ottoman Empire more than once, so he has Ottoman Empire 1, Ottoman Empire 2, Ottoman Empire 3. So he basically recreates the formula, but the formula is being made with different versions of the materials because he can't get the same oud twice, can't get the same sandalwood twice. So he makes the fragrance the way he would make it, but it's a 2 or a 3 because you can't get that same exact material. So at least he's willing to acknowledge. He's willing to acknowledge that the 2 or the 3 may smell a little different than the 1, but it's still the same fragrance in spirit. You know, in purpose and function, it's the same fragrance, but, you know, one for one, there may be slight differences. And then you've got brands that are a little more reliable on that front because they're using more synthetic materials. They're using more industry grade materials, so they can reliably recreate the fragrance. You know, Darren Allen, Mark Sage from Clandestine Laboratories, Manny Cross, Rogue, Indy Tower. These brands will continue to reproduce their fragrances until a point where they can't. Okay, if certain materials do go away forever and there's no way to reformulate, they don't have a way to viably recreate it, then they will retire the fragrance. But they make their best attempt to keep the fragrance stocked as long as they can. And I've only seen a few rare cases with these brands where they do finally have to sunset the fragrance. And if they do sunset the fragrance, they usually, it's been out long enough that people have had more than ample opportunity to get it. So it's not like they're stoking the fires. They're not trying to cause a panic. They're not trying to make people jump through hoops and buy it. They're like, okay, this has been on the shelf for 6 months to a year. I've made as many batches of this as I can, but I just cannot source this material, and therefore I cannot reliably recreate this. So get it or forever hold your peace, okay? That's fair. When it's only one person doing it all, bear in mind, one person doing it all, it's very fair. Now, should you bother even looking into independent fragrance? And the answer is maybe. If you find yourself growing increasingly tired of the tropes and themes and repetition that is becoming commonplace in designers, in niche, in any, you know, corporate perfume, you want something that's a little more honest, a little more unique, a little more artistic in nature. It's not necessarily designed to be pleasant, not designed to be mass appealing. It's really more like I said, wearable piece of art, and you're willing to pay for it, to take a chance on it, then yes, I think independent perfumery might be something worth looking into. And armed with the knowledge I just gave you, now you can enter the market, if you will, with more confidence. This has been The Unlist. Hope you enjoyed watching.